Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a joy to be here. I have been praying about this conference, which I do whenever I'm speaking. I start praying and I ask the Lord, what does He want me to focus on? And I have to tell you, I have had this incredible anointing that I've been feeling as I've been preparing for this, to a point of bringing me to tears. And I have asked the Lord for an open heaven over us today, that He would open the portals of heaven and His glory would come down upon each and every one of us, and that each and every one of us would receive everything with an open heart like never before, so that His truth would permeate us. I would like to begin with a reading from the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things came to be through Him. And without Him, nothing came to be. What came to be through Him was life, and this life was the light of the human race. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And the Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us, and we saw His glory, the glory as of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. From His fullness we have all received grace in place of grace, because while the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. The Gospel of the Lord. Jesus Christ. So I'm no theologian or a historian, but even to me, it seems like we're living in unprecedented times, where anger, division, hatred, and confusion is at its peak. And there seems to be a furious war on the soul of mankind. And sadly, this is happening simultaneously in our country and within the church. And which are the two basic foundations of society? The confusion in faith and the rejection of objective truth has brought about chaos and disorder. And truth is constantly being redefined to suit our feelings, with man being the center. If you remember Pilate's conversation with Jesus, when Jesus was standing before him as a prisoner, and Pilate said to him, "So you are a king, then?" And Jesus answered, and He said, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And Pilate responded mockingly, "What is truth?" And today, we hear the same mocking voice of the world saying to us, "What is truth?" Because according to the world, it's moldable, changeable, according to whatever you want, feel like, desire in that moment. That becomes your truth. We have gone so far as to reject the truth of our basic identity as created by God. And we say that we are now God. We will decide. And it is no longer binary, no longer male or female. It can be whatever we choose. They call it a choice, but really it's a dictatorship, because there is no choice given to reject this idea. The only choice we have is to agree and support every new distortion the world brings to the order and creation of God. And to speak about objective truth, good or evil, is considered archaic and unloving. Truth is now subjective, and a counterfeit gospel is being preached about peace and brotherhood and love, but without Christ in the center of it. But you can't have authentic love and peace without God. There can be no peace when truth is denied. Jesus never compromised with the truth. He never changed a word of what he said. When they were starting to persecute him, he didn't say, well, you know what, I didn't really mean it. This is not really my body and my blood that I ask you to eat. It was just a symbolic thing. And I didn't really mean that I am one with God. He didn't change anything. What he said forever. He chose to go to the cross instead of compromising with the truth. Truth was crucified 2,000 years ago, but truth was never compromised. Jesus loved us enough to leave us with the truth so that we would not be confused. St. Paul warned us in the letter to the Galatians. He said, "You were called to liberty, but be careful, or this liberty will provide an opening to self-indulgence." There is an outright war against God and his law, and we have to choose if truth is worth defending, fighting, and suffering for, or even dying for. Or will we let this great deception take over without even lifting a finger? St. Paul's words are very clear. He said, and it's chilling when I read it because it's like he's talking to us today. He said, "I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are now turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were trying to please people, I would not be a servant of God." Nobody has been given a right to change the gospel. Nobody. So is it enough to be a good person and let the world dictate our faith and we change the gospel of Jesus Christ? Do we compromise for the world? Is truth worth defending? Is Jesus worth defending? I personally had to answer this question. I was born in a Muslim family, and I thought being a good person was enough. But then Jesus entered into my life, and I had to answer this question. Is being a good person enough? Is there really a truth? And that is the story that I would like to share with you. That all this that I have introduced my talk with is everything I had to face myself personally. I was born in Pakistan to a Shia family. In Islam, there are two main sects. There's the Shia sect and there's the Sunni sect. And within the two, there are many denominations. And I come from the most liberal denomination of Islam. It's the Shia Ismaili Muslims. And we don't pray 5 times a day. I didn't have to cover my head. We prayed 3 times a day. And I didn't know how to read the Quran. And my parents, they taught us, I have 2 younger sisters, so there's 3 of us, and they taught us to be good people, good Muslims in knowing that Allah is the only God, there's only one God, and Mohammad is his messenger. And we knew, my sisters and I, that we were Muslims, we were gonna die Muslim, that was the only way, the only truth, and that was it. That's how it was going to be. So we grew up never ever questioning our faith. That is who we were. We didn't practice it like you would see on TV and hear about it. You know, we didn't cover our head, but in our hearts, we were Muslim. My parents were very kind and loving people, and they taught us to be very kind to everybody, love everybody, charitable, hospitable, but we knew that Islam was the only way, and then everybody else kind of was lost. When I was 4 years old, we moved to Africa. My father took a job there, and we moved there. We moved there with my grandmother, who we were very close to, my dad's mom, and my mom, my sisters. So we all moved to Africa. We moved to Tanzania, and we lived on the East Coast there by the ocean. We had a wonderful life there growing up. And we moved from there to Somalia. Then I lived in the Congo. I lived in Kenya. So we spent our life on the East Coast of Africa. And my sisters and I went to the American school there. We learned English since we were young. And we loved our life. Everything was very simple. We had no TV. We had no telephone. Of course, there was no internet, no cell phones, nothing. So what we had were a lot of friends. And we had a great family life. My parents had a great marriage. They were madly in love with each other. And so we saw a very happy home. And growing up in Africa and without all these other distractions, I just had a very simple outlook on life. And my favorite hobby was reading. And I would read, sometimes a book a day. And I started with mysteries. I loved Agatha Christie. So I just loved her books, and I would read those. And then as I got older, and I was 14, I started reading Mills and Boon, if you remember, Harlequin romances. And that became my whole, my world. I believed everything I read in there. I believed it was all true, because I didn't know any different. And so I believed that that's how life was supposed to be. Simple, you meet your knight in shining armor, and he courts you, and you get married, and everything is just wonderful. And a lot of them were Greek shipping tycoons. Life was pretty good. So that was my window into the world. And needless to say, that was not reality. And the other thing was my parents being Muslim, the girls, we were raised to be very obedient to our parents. So the thought of even saying, arguing with our parents, that would never enter our mind. If they said something, then that's how it was. So when I was 16, my parents arranged my marriage. I didn't argue because they know better, and the romances were playing with me. So I'm like, okay, here's my knight in shining armor. And so I just, was so caught up in that. I didn't argue, accepted it. At that time, we were living in the Congo. I got engaged. We were there, and my husband-to-be was 10 years older than me. I had met him a couple times at a party. He was my parents' friend's son, and because he had grown up in Africa as well, my parents thought that was a good match, that him and I could get along because we had both grown up in Africa. And so we were, when I graduated high school, I was 18, we went back to Pakistan, and I was married. And my parents left, and now I was in the country I was born in, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, and I had no idea about the culture, and it was like coming into a whole new country. Now, I had visited Pakistan. We would visit America, Pakistan, vacation, but it was a vacation. We always were there for like a couple months, and we had fun, and I hung out with my friends and my cousins, and then I went back to Africa, which was home, and dressed in Western clothes. And now I'm married to this man who's 10 years older than me, and now I have to live with his family, because that's part of the culture, is you live with your husband's family. So I'm living with my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and I have to take care of them and take care of my husband, and I'm 18 years old, and I have no idea how to do it. I'd never cooked, and my mother-in-law very quickly made me feel very incompetent. My husband was Sunni, and that is when I really got introduced to Islam, is when I got married. Now, my marriage from day 2 was nothing like a romance novel. So that story, that dream was over. And then I'm in a culture that I don't understand, in a religion that I thought was very simple, and now it's very complicated, because you have to wash a certain way, cleanse a certain way, fast, read the Quran, pray 5 times a day. And that was it just hit me really hard. It was a very dark period for me. I lived in Pakistan for 3 years. But I quickly realized that if I didn't quickly learn how to pray, I would never be accepted. If I didn't learn all the rituals and all, I would always look like the outsider. And I had no other choice. Divorce was never an option. It is not acceptable in our culture. Nobody in my family had ever gotten divorced. And I would bring shame on the family, and nobody would marry my sisters. So I had to make this work. And so I learned the namaz, learned how to do all the ritual cleansing and everything, started reading the Quran, and my mother-in-law was very happy to teach me all that. And I turned to Allah. That's when I really turned to my faith. And I started to beg Allah to save me, because only He could save me from this. Now, in Islam, Allah is not your father, He is your master. So you are worshiping Him from a distance, and you are begging Him because that's all you can do. And you are the creation. You are, way down here. And so I would just beg Allah to have mercy. And you do good deeds because you're trying to earn His approval. And I did everything I could to do that. And I would pray and beg Him to get me out of Pakistan, and that my husband would get a job outside the country and we could leave, at least get away from this oppressive culture and the family situation. In the Quran, there is a chapter that is dedicated to the Virgin Mary. It is called Surah Maryam. She's the only woman that gets that kind of honor. And when I started reading the Quran, that was the first thing that just really drew me in. I fell in love with this woman who was so beautiful, so holy, that her purity and her beauty just got me. And every day when I read the Quran, I would read that chapter. And I was pregnant with my daughter, and I just would pray that my child would be like her, holy and beautiful and good. In Islam, Mary is the mother of the Prophet Isa, Jesus. And Islam accepts that it is, a miraculous birth, that Mary was a virgin, and that Jesus was born speaking, and He had the gift of healing, but He was fully human. There's no divinity, and He died. He never suffered on the cross, because God would not let Him suffer on the cross, because He was such a beloved prophet of His. So the body that hung on the cross was really not Jesus. He was taken, and He will come again at the end of time to tell the non-believers that He is not the Son of God. That He will come to tell everybody, I was not the Son of God. It's Mohammad was the last prophet. So, and Maryam is His mother. So I'm in love with Maryam now, and begging and praying to God. And God heard my prayers, and my husband got a job in the Middle East. We moved to the United Arab Emirates, and we lived in Abu Dhabi and Dubai for 10 years. And my son was born there. and life was better than being in Pakistan because there's a little more freedom there. But my marriage did not get any better. Things continued to deteriorate, and it got so bad that I was close to a nervous breakdown. Now, I was telling my parents all through that I couldn't take it, I wanted to leave, because I'd see my parents once a year, and my parents would tell me, well, you're young, you need to compromise. They thought maybe I was being too childish, and I didn't understand. And he did a good act in front of my parents, and he looked like he was, wonderful. So nobody believed me. And it got to a point, and I couldn't really leave. Where would I go? I had 2 children at this point. I needed a place to go, someone to support me. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a career. So I had no money. And so I continued to tell my parents, and it got so bad that I was suicidal. And I just I couldn't do it. And I was sick, physically, mentally, emotionally, everything was a mess. And I told my dad that. And that's the first time that he really took me seriously. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to America. Now, at this point, my sisters are living in Canada, so it would only make sense that I should go where my family is. And my parents were going to be moving to Canada, too. But something in my heart said, America, that's where I have to go. That's where I'm going to get my freedom and a new life. So I had family in the United States, and my parents, my dad talked to his brother, and they said, yeah, sure, she can come and stay with us for a while. Now, everyone's thinking, I just need a break. I have no intention of ever going back. Now, I had been married 13 years, and life had been really difficult. So I planned to get out of Dubai, and now, in the Middle East, your husband has your passport. He is your sponsor, and he has all the rights. So if he didn't want me to leave, I couldn't leave. And so I said, I was going to take a vacation, take the kids. My husband was gone all the time. He was traveling, so he's hardly around. And so I planned my escape. And on the day, it was rough. He got an idea I had something going on. I wasn't going to come back. And he hid my passport. My flight was leaving in a few hours. And I was a wreck. And anyway, long story. That's why I have a book. But I got on that flight. And I sat there holding my 2 children. And until the plane took off, I didn't know if I was going to make it out. Because anybody could walk up on that plane and all he had to do was make a phone call. And they would take my kids, which would mean I wasn't going to leave my kids. And so when the plane landed in New York in 1999, when I got off that plane, I had $200. I had 2 children. I didn't know how to drive. I'd never worked, really. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew when I got off that plane that I was a free woman. Nobody was going to take me back to that oppression again. And so I started a new life. My aunt and uncle were wonderful. They helped me. My uncle taught me how to drive. I bought my first car at 30. It was a RAV4 from a used car. And I was the happiest person driving that car, following my uncle home, because I felt free. Because until then, unless a man drove me somewhere, I couldn't go anywhere. I was a prisoner. And I don't think you understand what it is to be able to drive. Till today, when I'm upset or I get in my car and I go for a drive, because it reminds me that I'm free. I can do this. And so life was getting better. And I had an apartment, I had my kids, and again, another long period going through the divorce, I had to reconcile with my ex, and all that happened. And I got through it. I got divorced. And very soon after that, I met Simon. And he was an American man, and he was wonderful. He was kind to my kids, met him at work, and I thought I'd found my knight in shining armor now in America. And now, at this point, I'm a very faithful Muslim. I pray 5 times a day. I fast. I had become like my husband's family. I was practicing Sunni Islam. I believed that a non-Muslim was going to go to hell, and only Islam was the way. So I meet this man, and to me, I'd never dated in my life, obviously, and I was not interested in casual relationships. So it was marriage. That's all I knew could be. And so Simon knew that, and I said, well, if you want to marry me, you have to become a Muslim, because a Muslim woman cannot marry a non-Muslim man. That's not a valid marriage. A Muslim man can marry a non-Muslim woman, and that's okay. So I told him, and he said, that's fine, I don't really care, it's fine by me. Now, Simon was baptized Catholic, never practiced, and didn't, he didn't mind. So we got married in the mosque. He became a Muslim. And we got married in the mosque, and I felt I had redeemed myself. I had the black mark of the divorce, and now I bring a man into Islam. So I just saved an infidel. So, so now I was looked upon with a lot of respect. Wow, look what she did. So all my friends who were all Muslim, I had not a single non-Muslim friend. So it's, the moderate Muslims you hear about, that was me. I was a moderate Muslim, assimilate in the culture, peace-loving, but within your walls, you're very, very Muslim. So, and all the friends are Muslim and everything. So now I bring this white man who's now a Muslim and to meet my friends, and they're like, I was, really looked highly upon for that. And Simon was good, he prayed 5 times a day, and he read the Quran, and I had a Quran teacher for my children. Now, my children were not happy. They were not interested in the Quran teacher, and she would say, you have nail polish, so your prayer's not accepted because the cleansing didn't happen right, and they would just throw a fit every time she would leave, and so it was a battle. But I was determined that even though I had gone through a divorce and done all these bad things, my children were going to be good Muslims. I was going to make sure that even in America, they were going to grow up good Muslims. So I continued that battle with them, and life was normal. What happened was my prayer changed. So now that things are kind of settled and normal, and I started now to seek God. See, I had been praying and begging God, save me, save me, save me, just trying to get through one problem after another. And now I started to ask Allah, who are you? I want to know you. And it just became this fire in me of, I just want to know you. And I would tell my friends, and they'd look at me and like, well, what more do you want? You pray, you do this, like, they'd look at me like, you're really strange. But I wasn't satisfied with just doing the check marks. I wanted to know him. And so I would pray, and I would be on my prayer mat every day, face down for hours, crying out to Allah to reveal himself to me. And I knew with no doubt that there was more, and I didn't know it. I knew there was more, and I knew I didn't have it, and I wanted it. So when I would pray, there would be this wall that I would see in my mind's eye very clearly, and there would be darkness and silence. No matter how much I prayed, I never heard a word back from God. And I didn't know what to do. One day, we went on vacation to New York City, and we went into St. Patrick's Cathedral. And the reason for this was a TripAdvisor stop. My husband insisted, you have to see this. So I'm like, okay, but what if, because fear is a big thing in Islam. Everything is about fear. You have to, God will strike you if you do this, if you think this, the list is very long. So the thought of going into a Christian church as a Muslim, I was afraid God was going to strike me for it. So I was telling Allah that I was sorry, but I'm only going here because, it's just to look at the building. That's all this is. I have no interest in these non-believers. And, Christians believe in a Son of God, which is blasphemy. And I would never, that's just terrible. So I was saying, asking for forgiveness as I went up the steps. And I walk in, and it took my breath away. The beauty of this magnificent church in the middle of New York City. It's like you just enter into another world. And the first thing that hit me was there was a stained glass picture of Jesus that was suspended there. And it looked like his eyes were alive. And they were like piercing right into me. And it made me very uncomfortable. And I quickly walked around, and I started to walk around the side, and I felt like he was following me. And the whole time, it's like this Jesus was right behind me. I could feel his eyes. And so I walk around, admired everything, and near the exit is a little gift shop. And so the kids were there, so I stopped there, and I'm telling Allah in my heart, like, I'm nearly out of here, I see the sunlight, the door, and suddenly I hear a woman's whisper, and she says, come back, come back. It was the sweetest, gentlest voice, and I looked, and there was nobody there. And I turned around like this is just in my head, and again, come back, come back. And when I heard this come back again, I knew who it was. It was Mary. And I also knew exactly where she was calling me to. She was calling me to her chapel in the back of St. Patrick's. And I couldn't say no to her because I loved her. I knew her from the Quran. So when she called me, I had to go. And so I said to my kids and my husband, I'll be back. I wasn't going to say I heard a woman talking, and, So I go to the chapel, and it's, there's a beautiful statue of Mary, and people are praying. There's silence. It's beautiful. The reverence was amazing. And I stood there, and I waited for her to say something more, like, why did you call me? And I heard nothing. And I just stood there for a while. I wouldn't even sit because, I wasn't going to give in any way. So I just stood there for a while, and I left. But there was something happened because I told my husband, we were there for like 3 days, every day, I don't care what we have scheduled, we have to make a stop at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I had encountered a peace that I had never encountered anywhere. And I just had to, there was this magnetic draw to come back. And so I did, and didn't hear anything more. And after that, life went back to normal. I fasted and prayed, and I just thought that was a good experience. I love Mary, and she spoke to me, and that was it. And it was December. So this was around like April. It was spring break. And now it's December, first week of December. And I was asleep. And when you're like deep asleep, and somebody just gently will touch you, and you're just kind of in between that kind of half awake, half asleep state. That's how it was, because I remember looking, and there was like light coming in through the window. The sun was just rising. And Jesus and Mary were at my bedside. And it was like heaven had just invaded my room. They were right close, like so close to me. And they spoke to me, and they talked to me about my life. And as all this was happening, as I saw them there, it's like my body was still on the bed, but my spirit wasn't. It's like I got up, I hugged them. It was like I had met my long-lost friends. Like we had, and I was 40 years old at this time. So it's like this 40 years of separation, and you finally meet, like you've been waiting to meet each other, and you finally have that meeting. And there was rejoicing, and we embraced, and we prayed together. And we talked about my life, and they showed me my life. And I said yes to everything. I was just so happy. Happy is not even enough, like can't describe it. And then as this was happening, there was a light that was being infused into my body. And when I woke up the next morning, I physically felt like I was not the same person anymore. I was changed. And I couldn't understand what had just happened to me. And I'm thinking that was a dream. Like that must have been something I'd just been thinking about. And like within minutes, it's like, no, that was not a dream. This happened, but I don't understand it. And the next thing that happened was I went to work, and I'm driving down the same road. I've been driving for years now, lived in the same place. And I pull out and going down the road, and I notice a church. I had never noticed it. I noticed the cross on that church. And I go along, and now there's another church. I did not know how many churches were on the road between my home to work. I was blind, and now I could see. Literally, I could see. It's like I couldn't see before. And I would go into a store, and if there was anything that was Christian, a Bible, anything, a quote, something, I was shown that. A voice would say, look, and I would immediately see that. And it's like I was mesmerized by, like something was happening that I couldn't understand. And I felt like a presence had come over me like a bubble. And it was this energy that surrounded me since I had that dream. And I knew without a doubt it was God. It was holy. I never thought like, okay, this is demonic, evil, anything. It was holy, and it was God, and it was all over me like an energy bubble, and it went with me everywhere. And I didn't understand what was happening. I had been praying to Allah to reveal himself for years now, begging every day. And he sends me Jesus. Like, he should have sent me Mohammad. Like, that would make, that would make sense. I had a box for God. It said Muslim on it, and everything had to fit in that box, and I'm asking God, but I've given him the box to fit in, and it just wasn't fitting. And it was Jesus who kept showing up, and then I started having more dreams, and Mary starts speaking to me and leading me to places, and it's like these breadcrumbs, and I'm like going after because I just wanted to know, but I was also very confused. And then I started to get angry. I was really angry with God because I had gone through a divorce. I had gone through such a struggle. Things were normal. Now he brings Jesus. Could we just keep this simple? You send me Mohammad, and I get my answer, and, we just move on. Like, can life just be simple? But it was a challenge. I didn't know what to do with this. So now there is a war. There is Isa and there's Jesus. The Isa of the Quran is a prophet. The Jesus who comes to me in my dreams and encounters doesn't look like a prophet. He comes with power and authority and a presence that screams God. This is not a dead prophet come to visit me in a dream. But I never felt fear. It was just like this invitation, and I didn't know to what. And so this continues. Again, long story, there's the book. And then I meet this lady at work. And as these dreams are happening, and I don't know what to do with it. Now, obviously, I'm not going to tell my Muslim friends. And I tell my husband, of course, and he says, oh, yeah. Now, he's been practicing Islam with me. He's like, well, I was thinking, Islam is crap. And that's what he said. This is just a cheap imitation of the Bible. And I'm like, I covered my ears, like, don't say that. We're going to get, struck. And he's like, well, and I would leave the room. I'd be so angry. I'd storm out of the room. And then 5 minutes later, I'd come back like, tell me more. And then he's like, well, Jesus is the Son of God. And I'd run out of the room again. Like, don't ever say that. That's blasphemy. And then I'd come back, tell me more. So he told me about Christianity and what it was. I never went on the internet because I refused to give it credit. Like, I didn't want to feed into this. So I'm like, I don't want this. If this is coming from God, then only he's going to talk to me about this. So my friend at work, I start telling her about this. And her name's Debbie. She was going to be here today, but she couldn't make it. So I tell Debbie about it, and I'm like, I'm having these dreams, and it's driving me crazy. And I remember she's a nurse, and I remember standing in her office, and she grabs my hand, and she's like, you're so blessed. Like, and I said, I don't feel blessed. I want this to stop. I want this to go away so I can go back to my normal life. And she gives me a rosary. She said, I just feel that I don't know what to do, but I feel that this will help you. And I've never seen a rosary before. It was a Christmas rosary. She said, it's been blessed by a priest. And she gives it to me. It was beautiful, and I took it. And in Islam, we have prayer beads. So I'm like, okay, and I kept it. And that was it. Well, she started telling me, come to my church. You should come to my church, because I keep telling her what was happening. And I'm like, I'm not going to any church. I don't want this. I want this to stop. So anyway, goes on for a while. It doesn't stop, and I don't stop following the breadcrumbs, and it just keeps taking me further and further. Finally, I'm like, okay, it's Christmas time, and now, Jesus, I want an answer so we can end this. And so I said, I'll make a deal with you. I will come to your church. It's a big step for me. On Christmas, and you're going to tell me what you want, and then we're going to put an end to this, and life can go back to normal. So I pick a church. There's a sign that says Christmas midnight service, and I don't know denomination. I don't know what Catholic is. I don't know Protestant. I'm not interested. So I go to the church down the road to this Christmas service, and it was wonderful. The kids went with me. We all went together. And kids were kind of getting happy that Mom maybe not doing this Islamic teacher anymore. So like, yes, Mom, we should go to the church. And so we go, and it was beautiful. I mean, the pastor, everybody welcomed us, and pastor did a reading from the Bible. He gave a talk. Everybody sang. We had candles, and we processed out. And I remember walking out with the candle, and my husband says to me, so what did you think? And I said, he wasn't there. And he looked at me like, what do you mean? I said, the one who has been calling me was not there. You see, on a human level, it was beautiful. On the physical, everything. In my spirit, there was this emptiness that I felt. And I was frustrated too, because I didn't know what I meant when I said it, but I knew he wasn't there. The one who's been calling me. What I was seeking. I felt empty, and I was so disappointed. And I said to Jesus, I come to your church. I take this big step for you, and you're not even there. Like, where am I going to go now? Because I thought that was your home, and you would tell me there. So I told Debbie, well, I went to church, and he wasn't there. And she said, where did you go? And I told her, down the road. She's like, just please come to my church. And I said, well, why is your church any different? And she said, just come to my church. And I said, okay, because I'm desperate. I really want this to end. So I'm like, okay, I'll come to your church, but I'm not going to spend an hour at a service. Just take me when no one's there. I'll know if he's there. And then, you know, I don't want to go through a service now. So she said, okay. She was Catholic, which again, to me, it didn't mean anything. So she takes me to her church, Roman Catholic church. And we walk in that morning, empty church. And the first step I take a breath, and I'm like, he's here. I feel him. It was this warmth that came over me, and I felt his presence. And I said, finally, I have found you home. Now I know where I'm going to come to talk to you, to get an answer. And from that day on, I started going to that Catholic church in the morning. Nobody was there. I would make sure in my day I had time put aside to make it there. And I would sit and I would argue with the crucifix every day. And I said to him, you're not the Son of God. Why are you doing this to me? Why don't you leave me alone? And I would argue and argue with him. And then I would tell him about my day. This is happening at work, and my daughter's now a teenager, and this culture, this is so. Share everything with him, leave, and I would show up the next day, and I would do the same thing again. Every day, I couldn't miss a day. Now, Sundays, I couldn't go because people came to church, which meant I couldn't go in there to be alone. So I hated Sundays because I couldn't go and tell him the same thing I told him every day. It's like my day was not complete without doing that. That was like the highlight of the day. And he had become my friend. But I didn't realize that. I would start with the argument every time. You are not the Son of God, would be my first thing. And so I did this for months. And finally, one day, I walk into the church, same thing. You're not the Son of God. And that day, in that empty Catholic church, I heard the audible voice of God echo. I heard it with my ears. And he said to me, who are you to tell me who I can be and cannot be? If you want to know the truth, go and come back like a child, and I will tell you the truth. I ran out of the church. I couldn't believe that God had just spoken to me. There was no anger in the voice, but there was such power and authority. It sounded like a father. And I knew exactly what he had said to me. These words will always remain with me. Who am I to tell him he can't have a son? Who am I? He's God. So that was the first thing. Who are you to tell me that I can't have a son? If you want to know the truth. Now, I had been in pursuit of truth pretty much my whole life. I always wanted truth in everything. And I had been seeking and seeking and seeking what's behind that wall. I want it. And he's telling me, if you want it, so now I know there is a truth, and I don't have it. And if you want it, so I have a choice, go and come back like a child. I couldn't be the one to tell him. I had to listen. And he said, go. So think about it. And if you want, come back. And he made me a promise. I will tell you the truth. I got a promise that day. I knew that I had a choice to make whether I wanted this truth. And I also knew that this truth would change my life. And I also knew the truth was going to cost me. And my life would never be the same again. And I had to make a decision if I wanted to go and hear it. Because I could have never gone back and walked away. And at this point, I couldn't walk away from the truth. God is offering me truth. How do I just walk away and say, never mind? I had to go back. And I remember the day when I walked in and I had made my decision, and I sat down in the same pew in the back, and I emptied my mind of what I had believed, heard, been told by my parents and people around me, because it's only people who told me. And in just for a few seconds, like everything's wiped away, and I said, tell me. Like just this openness to hear what he has to say. Instantly, in that moment, a bolt of light came from that crucifix, and it hit my heart, went through my body, and I shook. And I knew it was like this infusion that happened in that moment. And I had never knelt, and in that moment, Jesus was before me, and my knees just crumbled. And I fell on my knees for the first time, sobbing. And all I could say was, I believe you are the Son of God. I believe. Because the word tells us that at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bend, and every tongue confess that he is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And those words from Scripture came alive for me in that moment. I don't even know what happened, but all I knew was I was on my knees, crying out, I believe. And I knew who he was. I had been seeking truth, but truth was not a philosophy, an idea. Truth was a person, and his name was Jesus Christ. I had been seeking a person. I had been in pursuit of Jesus in the name of truth. And he was there before me. And that day when I accepted Jesus as Lord, as God, in that moment, like the floodgates opened, and that wall that I would see before me when I prayed as a Muslim, that wall crumbled in front of my eyes. And on the other side of the wall that I'd been trying to get to was the Father. And he said to me, I have waited so long for you. This wall of separation was there between us because I had refused to accept Jesus. When I accepted Jesus, there was no separation. I was in the Father's embrace. Jesus came to reveal the heart of the Father. He came to make a way for us into relationship with the Father. And it's not possible to have a relationship with God without Jesus. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He didn't say, no one comes to God except through me. There's a big difference. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you want a relationship with God, you have to go through the Son. I had a relationship with God from the outside, on the other side of the wall. I kept hitting on the wall, wanting more of God. But he couldn't take down the wall because the only way to that, to him, to his heart, the heart of the Father, is through the Son. And that day when I accepted Jesus, the Father embraced me. and I became his daughter. I went from an orphan to a daughter in that moment. It was the most glorious day. It was like been in the desert for 40 years, and finally I have this water, this living water, to quench my thirst. I walked out of that Catholic church that day, and everything was different. I felt different. It looked like the colors were more vibrant. It was like everything was washed in this fresh rain. And the birds were singing. I could hear better. I had eyes to see and ears to hear. Jesus had given me the kiss of life. You know, the romance novel with the prince and Sleeping Beauty comes, you know, he wakes. That's what I got. He brought me to life. And so now what was I going to do? I had to decide. You know, I mean, I savored this, and, you know, I told my husband, he's like, oh, that's great. And, you know, but he didn't really understand, you know. He was kind of watching from the outside. He gave me the facts and the information along the way, but he was never really involved. So he said, well, that's good. What do you want to do? And well, I have to tell my parents. And because my whole life was in Islam, you know, the culture and the faith were so together. So I met with my parents. They were in town, and I told them, I had to tell them exactly what had happened. And they were shocked, and they were like, well, but you can't convert. And I said, well, I can't deny what just happened. And so we had this long talk. And they said, well, doesn't Jesus say to honor your mother and father? And I said, yes. But before that, he says to love your God with all your heart and all your mind. And I said, I love you, but God is first. So I have to follow him. So then they said, well, do you really have to go to church if that makes you happy? But, I mean, you don't have to convert. Like, don't tell anybody. And, you know, you have kids who's going to marry your daughter, you know, the whole thing. So I said, now that I have found the truth, I will not live a lie. It's impossible. And it's like Jesus had set a fire in me. It was this fire that just burns, and it's Jesus. So how do I keep the fire inside? It wants to come out. Like every word I say, I want to say Jesus. So how do I hide this? I can't do it. You know, this has to come out. And so my mom got sick. I went through a lot of guilt. You know, I went through that with the divorce, and now this is like the worst thing you can do is leave your faith. I mean, apostasy. You know, this is the worst thing you could do. What parents, and we understand that, because if our kids would choose to go to a different religion, you know, we would be devastated. So I understood, but I didn't know how to explain it. Like, I don't know what to do. I can't deny what this is. And so I went forward. I joined RCIA and started going to church and began a whole new life. Jesus, when I talk about identity in the beginning, you know, that we have this confusion about identity, Jesus restored my identity. I had no idea who I was, because we find our identity in God, because that's where we come from. And if that is not clear, then the rest of our identity, because the building block isn't there, is distorted. It's confused, and there is chaos. So Jesus restored who I was. He took me from being a slave to his daughter, and he paid the price of my freedom by his own blood. Jesus reminded me that I was a gift, and his life was a gift to me. And I didn't have to do works to earn it. It's not Moses, through Moses we got the law. And not that Jesus came to abolish the law, he came to fulfill the law. So, but he came with grace. See, before we only had the law. With Jesus, we have the law and we have grace. For us to just fulfill the law by works is impossible. We can't do it. The wages of sin is death. That's what the word says. So we would all be condemned to death. Jesus came with grace. So when we accept it, he pays the wages for our sin, and we are able to live as free people, not as slaves anymore. But we have a slave mentality because that is what we are raised. You know, you do things. You do things to earn things. So we have a slave mentality, and it's very hard to just say, what, this is free? Like I just get saved, and I don't have to do anything? Good works come from being saved. But it's not just the works, you know? When you're saved, the works come, but you're not doing the works because you want to be saved. You already are saved. There's freedom in that. There is no other religion that offers a Savior who is willing to die. No other religion offers a Savior except Jesus Christ. There is no other name given in the heavens and the earth through which we are to be saved other than Jesus Christ. That is the only name given. So I have my conversion, and years go by, and I just want to share this one example with you because I think we all have a tendency to go back to slavery. So I started again, I was going to daily mass, I was doing things, I was doing rosary, novenas, mass, all the things we're supposed to do that are good. And mornings are kind of hard for me, so getting up early in the morning is always a challenge. And going to morning mass, so I was going to daily mass, and I'm like, okay, I have 5 more minutes before I have to get up. And so I'm rushing out the door. So I was at the door, hurrying up. I have 5 minutes, I have to, get to my car. And I heard the Lord say to me, stop. It was so strong and when I say he said to me, it's not like I hear voices all the time. It's interior. Right? There are a few times I've heard God audibly, but it's like in your heart, you just get this very strong stop and sit down. And with it, I get the understanding, like get a cup of coffee, just sit down. So I immediately took my shoes off, went to the kitchen, got a cup of coffee. It was so quick, like I got my crucifix, lit a candle, sat down, and I said, okay, Lord, here I am. And he said, I have called you friend, not slave. And I had the most profound, hours-long encounter with Jesus in my living room. Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He was not wanting me to be a slave with the mentality. I'm not saying doing all those things was bad. It's how, with the mentality that I was running, like, okay, got to get my check, went to mass, did this. I had fallen into the slave mentality again. And he stopped me and said, it's your friendship I desire. I have no place to lay my head. I need a friend to be with. When we have friends, and if all we're doing is, oh, you need this, let me do this for you, and I'll do this for you, and you're like, just stop. Can you just hang out with me? Can we just have a cup of coffee together? Like, that's just be. And that's what he was saying to me. Like, okay, that's all nice, but can you just hang out and have coffee with me? And I just was. And from that day on, every morning, I have coffee with Jesus. And that has become and that's when I journal. Sometimes I get led to scripture. Sometimes I'm just venting. Sometimes he says something. Whatever it is, it's a friendship. And I don't try to control it and lead it. I'm there. And sometimes I'm angry. And Jesus doesn't mind if you share with him you're angry and frustrated because we don't see everything. He knows that. And we sometimes don't understand. And it's okay to bring that to him too. And so my coffee with Jesus was a turning point to remind me to stay with my first love, the way I fell in love with him, to stay there, to stay in friendship, not slave. And we have to remember that Jesus called us friends. We are his friends. We are not slaves. We are born from a promise. Abraham had 2 sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. The son of the slave woman was born naturally, but the son of the freeborn was born from a promise. We are people of the promise. That's who we are. We have to be careful we don't go into slavery. And today we have a choice to make. Do we stand in our true identity as friends of Jesus Christ, his disciples, his followers, and his friends? Or do we abandon our friend hanging on the cross and walk away with the crowd because that's just too ugly, that's just too difficult? Or do we stay with him? Jesus didn't ask us for our plan, and he didn't ask us what our idea was for the salvation of the world. He's got that. He's on the throne. He's got the plan. We just have to be his friend in the process. And when we don't understand, we have to trust our friend. In Jesus, I found the greatest romance and the greatest mystery. And the challenge for us is that we have to embrace this mystery, not figure it out, like whodunit, Agatha Christie, but embrace it and be willing to live in the mystery. It is a mystery, and we are called to live in this mystery of salvation. St. Augustine says it perfectly. He says, to fall in love with God is the greatest romance. To seek him, the greatest adventure. To find him, the greatest human achievement. Thank you.